title. So you saw the title. Should Black Americans enter the U.S. military? And of course, as I've mentioned before, I did 20 years in the military. I did 4 as an infantry officer, 16 as an Army doctor. And so why, if I served in the military for 20 years, would I think it's anything other than good for you to serve 20 years in the military? Well, a lot of that comes down to the fact that the new administration, led by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and of course Donald Trump, the President, has seemingly gone out of its way to symbolically disrespect Black people. First and foremost, this is done by taking on a Secretary of Defense who's only 40 years old and only had 16 years of active duty service and worked as a television anchor. Previous Secretaries of Defense are what you call senior statesmen. The average age is about 60 years old. I think it was 58.4 or something like that when I did the math. And typically, if they are an Army officer, they've done 30-year careers and retired as generals. The last one, Lloyd Austin, was a retired general who did about 30 years and was an African-American male. It would be like replacing a high school principal with a teenager, essentially, something like that. And one of the first things that Pete Hegseth does is dismiss the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a general who's a F-16 fighter pilot with about 30 years of service, who clearly is a very qualified military official, and he's African American. And they justify this by saying that he's too woke, which is a modern pejorative for Black or simply compassionate or empathetic. Then they also take out Lieutenant General Toledo Crossland. And of course, Toledo Crossland directly intervened in the way that the military system handles doctors in residency. I made a video last year. She responded to it by fixing the system. And I don't know that they did this because of that. However, I know that a number of people who saw what she did could have been bothered enough that they reached out to Hegseth and asked him to do it. It's completely possible, but I have no evidence of it. Now, like I said, this is a symbolic disrespect, the carrying on about DEI, the things that they did where they tried to pull the segment on the Tuskegee Airmen and wipe the DOD pages of mentions of Black people, Jackie Robinson, contributions, things like that. It's not exactly a substantial blow to the progress of Black people. Because there are something like 40 Black generals who are still in their position, and I know of at least 2 4-star generals, one in the Marines, one in the Army, who are still in their positions. So it isn't as if all Black officers everywhere were taken down, but it did seem to be something of a dramatic show to let some people know, hey, we're going to look out for the white guy. And of course, what it tells people is feel free to disrespect your Black subordinates, because at the top, we don't have a problem setting merit aside and promoting based on appearance. That's what it seemed to say to me. So that's the difference between when I served and when you might be serving if you're considering going in the military. So, do I think this will amount to a significant difference in the way you experience the military? It's possible that it won't, because after all, there's several layers between the President, Secretary of Defense, and wherever you come in. It's all going to depend on the people you're under, but it's just not a good tone. And so that's why you might question whether you want to do it or not. Now, one of the dominant reasons people come in the military is patriotism. If you are an African American and you are coming in the military for patriotism, I suggest you go talk to somebody. Get your mind right, read a couple books, because that doesn't make any sense. It actually doesn't even make sense as a white guy, because patriotism is something I regard as protecting, standing up for. But the truth is, the U.S. military doesn't protect American people. The U.S. military is an offensive weapon. We are the bullies. We start stuff. And the last 10 military encounters have nothing to do with protecting the American people. Let's just go to Afghanistan. Well, 9/11 happened because we had been meddling with the Middle East. They were tired of it, so they orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. our presence in Afghanistan was simply revenge for their revenge. Okay. Then Iraq, everybody knows that was based on a lie. Then the first Gulf War, Iraq invades Kuwait. Well, how many other people have invaded other people and we didn't do anything? Oh, it turns out that Kuwait had a lot of oil, and if Iraq controlled that oil, it would affect us. So we went in. But brutality of at least equal magnitudes was ignored by the U.S. military at the same time if it happened somewhere else in the world where someone couldn't give us something we wanted. Okay. Then you go back to the Panama invasion. Not good. It seemed like it was more about testing out our weapons, flexing our muscles, but there was no Americans in danger. No Americans in danger. We just went in there and shot the place up because we didn't like what Noriega was doing, a guy who we had trained. All right, then go back to Vietnam. Of course, there was no reason. We weren't protecting Americans by going to Vietnam. And Korea was almost the same thing. It was more ideological, global positioning kind of thing. So, when it comes to the U.S. military, if you go in, understand you are not going in the military to protect your mom, your uncle, your grandma. You are going in to serve whatever whims the president or the people who influence the president have about using our weaponry. Okay. Now, is that a reason not to go in? I don't think so. At the end of the day, you should go in the military if it's beneficial to you. You're probably not going to hurt anybody. Okay? So I wouldn't recommend, saying, I'm not going to have anything to do with the military because I don't want to hurt anyone. But let me tell you the conditions under which the military would be a good idea for a young black man or a young black woman. Okay, so you're from a family where you guys have been struggling. You live in a place where there's not a lot of opportunity. Go into the U.S. military. They will give you a place to live. They will feed you and basically clothe you. And pretty much almost anybody who can just follow instructions and show up for work on time can have a 10-year career in the military. All right. So 10 years in the military, being paid somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 a year, you have to understand that $30,000 to $40,000 is almost completely disposable. If you don't have a family or children to support, none of that money needs to be spent. Now, what I'm about to tell you is done by almost nobody. I didn't really observe anyone do it. But there is a way that you can flip your fortunes by going into the military. You can go from poor with nothing to 10 years later having enough to buy a house and then enter college with a home purchased. And you can be preparing for college the whole time you're there so that when you get to college and you go to college while living in your home that you purchased, you can absolutely obliterate the curriculum. So it goes like this. You enter the military at 17. When you enter, you make it a point that you're not going to buy a car because that's a huge drain. You're not going to start drinking and partying. And for the most part, you're not going to date any girl that needs you to take her somewhere fancy. If you can find a girl that lets you date her on base and go to places on base, fine. But I would strongly recommend that you just don't even consider getting married. Because at 17, why would you need to get married before 27, right? I mean, let's think about it. Nobody really, as a man, nobody really needs to get married before 27. As a female, maybe you feel pressure to get married by 25, but I think even females could get married by 27 and be okay. All right, so if you go 10 years with $30,000 to $40,000 that doesn't need to be spent, and you bank 90% of that money, that's still something like $250,000 that you would have at your disposal as soon as you get out. That's a big chunk of change. Anywhere in America, other than like the East Coast and the West Coast and the most expensive cities, that could be enough to buy a house. In a town where you're going to college, maybe, maybe not. But that is a solid chunk of change. But like I said, that takes 10 years of discipline, resisting temptation with women, with cars, with alcohol. And remember, the bases are lined with liquor stores, strip clubs, used car sales, or used car lots, everything looking to take that money from young 17-year-olds who've never had money before. So if you can defeat that temptation, you can win. you can have a solid start to life. So, if that is something you can do, 100%, I recommend you give the military a try. But again, that's if there are no other options. Now, another exception is if you go in the military, there's a couple specialties you can do that are very, very, profitable for you in the future. A lot of that has to do with computers. So I put them on my phone here. I'm going to flash them up on the screen. If I was recommending that my son go into the military, which actually my son is 15, I'm not really recommending he go into the military. But not everybody is like my son, and not everybody has a father who can kind of like move obstacles out of their way for them. So that's why I might recommend other people do it. But like I said, I've mentioned before, I'm the third generation of my family to go in the military. If people in my family have to keep going in the military generation after generation, it's kind of like somebody's not getting their stuff together. So I feel like, yes, I've gotten my stuff together enough that my son doesn't need to do that, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But if I did recommend it, the first thing I'd recommend is he go into the Air Force. And what I'm going to read to you right now are the top 20, what they call AFSCs, which these are the areas that you can specialize in, the types of things you can do in the military. All right, so the very first one is cyber warfare operations. Okay, this is an extremely valuable skill. This is where you counter hack or hack other nations' stuff, or you protect our software, our networks from enemies attacking us from abroad. This translates directly to the banking sector. Banks need to protect their software, and all companies have to have some kind of cyber protection plan. Okay, so as soon as you get that skill by coming in the Air Force, becoming a cyber warrior, and learning all about that, you become extremely valuable to the outside world. You might not even need to go to college, truthfully. So you could do 10 years as a cyber warrior, have an exceptional skill, and have that, $300,000, $250,000 saved that I mentioned if you're a very disciplined individual. All right, the next is cryptologic language analyst. So this is code breaking, essentially. Really cool. Not sure it's going to translate to much money on the outside, but pretty cool. All source intelligence analyst. Also pretty cool. Not sure it's going to translate to much money on the outside unless, of course, you come in as a contract intelligence person working for the military as a civilian, which usually does pay a little more. So then there's tactical air control party. This is a person who's on the ground with the infantry, calling in the aircraft so that they can, destroy the targets that the infantry sees right now. We used to see these guys when I was in the infantry. Air traffic control. This is also an extremely valuable skill. So these are the guys at the airport in those tall cylinders that you see standing above the airport looking at all the planes moving around. Very important job. We've recently heard about some air traffic incidents. Obviously, it's important for preventing that kind of stuff. Pays well, kind of stressful. But again, you would have the skills to do that job in the civilian world for like $170,000 as soon as you leave the Air Force. Then there's also an airborne cryptologic language analyst. So that's probably a guy in an airplane flying over, intercepting signals, and trying to break code on people as you fly over their airspace. Interesting, but probably doesn't translate to high income. Here's airborne mission system specialist. So this is maintaining communication systems inside the aircraft. Interesting, probably does translate to good income, as airplanes have to have functional communication systems no matter where they are in the world, no matter what kind of airplane. So you would be good to go work on airplane communication systems for the rest of your life if you were to have that skill. Then remotely piloted aircraft sensor operator. So this is a person who's operating the sensors on a UAV. Sounds kind of fun. Sounds kind of entertaining. Not sure that it would translate to much income outside of the military. Then advanced fighter aircraft integrated avionics. Also a very interesting job, high level of technicality. Probably could translate to a good income if you came back as a civilian and did the same job. But, there's no fighter aircraft in the civilian world, so, But avionics, they're in civilian aircraft, just not fighter avionics. There's aerospace propulsion. They maintain and repair aircraft engines. A very valuable job. Highly valuable job. Aircraft armament systems. Okay, civilians don't bomb things, so, very interesting. However, It's mostly putting missiles onto planes. Essentially, you see footage of this a lot. Munition systems, they store and manage munitions. Civilians don't blow things up, so your ability to manage munitions might not be that valuable in the outside world, but very interesting. You probably need a high level of security clearance to be touching munitions all the time, so that can be helpful too. Cyber transport systems, they troubleshoot communication systems. And then there's cyber systems operations. So both of these I think would be very valuable. So just there I've listed a bunch of Air Force jobs, kind of what can help you and what may not help you as much. Now, if we move over to, I'm sorry, there's a few more. There's the cyber systems there's explosive ordnance disposal. That sounds great. Also doesn't translate too much to the civilian world, and I don't know how much you're going to be blowing things up as an Air Force guy, but it's probably like whenever there's a bomb that hasn't exploded that's still around and has to be dealt with, you're probably the guy. I don't know how often that comes up. In the Army, unless we're at war, it doesn't come up. Hardly. But in the civilian world, in the Air Force, I don't know. Then there's aerospace medical service. So you are a medic. All right. That means that in the sort of hierarchy of medicine, there's the doctors running around, then there's the nurses, and then there's you as the medic. If we are not at war, understand that basically that means you're going to work in an Air Force hospital taking vitals, temperatures, and blood pressures. Not to disparage, but I see these guys at Fort Meade, I've seen them at Walter Reed, they're not that happy. Medics, they have one idea of what it's going to be like. They're going to be on a battlefield and somebody's going to scream medic and they're going to run up and throw a tourniquet on somebody and drag them out, and then they find out that most people in the military don't end up in combat situations, and instead you're just used as an administrative sort of stopping point as people come into clinic, and you're just used administratively around a military hospital, and they end up very unhappy. So I don't actually recommend that job. Then there's the PJs, of course. This is like the Navy SEALs for the Air Force. Combat control, these are also guys on the ground who are controlling combat aircraft in the air, so it's kind of like air traffic control. And then there's survival, escape, resistance specialists, SEER specialists. So you train other people on how to survive if they are unlucky enough to become a downed pilot. Pretty good, all right? So that's your Air Force specialties. If I recommended, if anybody was going to go into the military, I would recommend they go into the Air Force because they have the best lifestyle by far, and they have the most technical jobs, which can translate to high-paying positions in the civilian world. The Air Force is also the hardest to get into. They once upon a time had a requirement that you could not have a GED. So, the GED just means you graduated from high school. But they decided, a GED means you didn't have the discipline or the home structure to actually finish high school on time, and you went back later and got a GED. So we don't want you. They figured out that they could sort of remove some people that they didn't want to deal with by just making that requirement, and so they did. So the Air Force is harder to get into, but those jobs I mentioned, well worth it. So if you're considering the military, do your best to go there. And then, of course, that brings me to how do you get these jobs? Well, you have to take the ASVAB, A-S-V-A-B. It's essentially a glorified IQ test, but you can get your score higher simply by studying for it. There are numerous ASVAB study courses. I think there's one given by Kaplan. They'll give you lectures. They'll give you practice questions. You want to get the highest score possible so that you have the options available to you when you walk in to get the job that you want, the job that's going to translate to good, solid income when you get out. All right, now just for information's sake, I'll go through one more service. All right, so that's going to be, I'm very familiar with the Army. Okay, so Army. I don't recommend people go in the Army if they have a choice. Not because I got anything against the Army, but just because the Army, as a ground force that primarily specializes in active combat, that's their strength. Having the numbers and the organization to overwhelm our enemy when we are in combat. What this means is when we're not in combat, we got a lot of extra people not doing anything. For instance, there's this thing called the laundry platoon. Okay, get this. A division, which is thousands and thousands of people, has a platoon responsible for doing laundry. Makes sense, because when you're in the desert, and everybody's spread out, you can't have washing machines everywhere, and you can't have everybody washing their stuff by hand. That'd be laborious. So they have actual logistics set up so that there is a laundry platoon. Well, guess what the laundry platoon's doing when we're not at war? I don't know, but it's not good, and it's probably not super useful. Okay? If you're in the laundry platoon and you see this, I'm sorry, but that's my assumption. All right, so anyway, that's the reason why I don't recommend people go in the Army, because I saw too much wasted time. Too many people who are in jobs that have a purpose in combat, but we weren't in combat and they were doing nothing, or they were doing administrative nonsense. Okay, so here are the top 20 jobs that I could find listed for the Army. All right, so 17 seats, cyber operations specialist. You notice cyber comes up again. Again, this is going to be a high ASVAB score kind of specialty, so you want to take that ASVAB multiple times. You want to get the highest score possible, and you're going to use that score, of course, to qualify for these jobs. 35F, intelligence analyst. That means you're going to look at maps, you're going to get data, intercepted signals, whatever. Very interesting, however, probably doesn't translate to a lot of different jobs outside of the military. So consider that. They say number 3 is 68 Whiskey, which is a combat medic. It's just like the medic from the Air Force. If you're a medic in the Army, that means you're under the doctors, under the nurses, under the PAs, and then comes you, the medic. What that usually means is you're doing administrative tasks, taking blood pressures, taking temperatures, and just moving patients, taking them to their rooms, sitting at desks. It would be awesome in combat. You're saving people's lives, but most of the time we're not in combat. So you're just being used as an administrative extra hand. So consider that. 25 Bravo, information technology specialist. So they troubleshoot and maintain military systems. So probably good, but probably not as technical as 17C cyber operations specialist. All right. Then there's the 91 Bravo wheeled vehicle mechanic. So this is just a mechanic. I shouldn't say just a mechanic. This is a mechanic. So if you want to be a mechanic in the outside world, or you love being a mechanic in the outside world, why not be a mechanic in the Army? Do it for 10 years, stack that money the way I said before, get out, maybe you can open your own shop. After you have the skills you gain in the Army, don't go be a mechanic for, some other company. Start your own shop or something like that and actually build true wealth. Then 15W, unmanned aerial vehicle operator, so UAV. Playing remote control planes all day. Sounds fun. You probably don't do it that often, is my guess. And when you're not in the field flying your little remote control airplane around, I'm sure you are doing, that's right, a bunch of administrative nonsense. All right, so then 7 is 68C practical nursing specialist. They provide nursing care to patients. This is some variation of a medic. Again, I don't necessarily recommend people do that. 42 Alpha, human resources specialist. These are almost, there's a joke in the military that they're always females with tight pants on. I would say yes. They're almost universally female. They are human resources. Just like in the civilian world, human resources, primarily women. And they do personnel actions. So it's an office job, universally an office job. It rarely involves anything outside of an office. So if that's what you want to do, okay. 89 Delta, explosive ordnance disposal. Like I said before, that's great if you're in combat. It's great if something has to be blown up. Chances are you're not going to spend much time in combat. Chances are you're not going to blow much stuff up. So what are you going to be doing if you're not doing that? That's right, administrative nonsense. Okay? So you kind of get the idea. Let me just see a few more. 31 Bravo, military police. I never met a happy military police soldier. I used to work for a military police brigade when I was in Hawaii. They were very unhappy, very stressed, very unhappy with the job. Then there's a 92F, petroleum supply specialist. This is a person who pumps fuel for trucks, for helicopters. Not very glamorous, and you inhale a lot of fumes. Wouldn't recommend you do that one, but here it is listed as one of the top 20. All right, so I'll probably finish right there. Again, if I was to summarize, as an African American considering military service, do it for you. All right, you're not going to do it for the United States. You're not going to do it because it's going to protect anybody you love. You're going to do it because it's beneficial to you and to your immediate family who you can provide for, and that's about it. All right, do I think that the sort of what really appears to me as racial hostility being promoted by the President and Secretary of Defense, do I think that's going to be a problem or that's going to dominate your experience? I actually don't think so. I think it's awful what they've done, but I'm not sure it's going to transform the culture, from them down. I think that's what they'd like to see happen. I think they'd like to see white men feeling free to disrespect minorities as they please. But I don't think that that's exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, I think you are less protected than you were before because they're trying to weaken many of the things that protected us from mistreatment. So I think that it's an option. It's a steady income. It will give you work experience. Yes, there's a chance that you are going to be disrespected. There's a low chance that you're going to be injured or hurt in the line of duty. So for the most part, if you can tolerate all the things I brought up, I think it is a worthwhile thing to do, but only in the interest of self, not all the God, country, honor, and all that stuff. No. Let's not be deceived by any of that. All right, so anybody has anything to add, throw it down in the comments. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.